On December 27th, 2022, Gisselle Victoria-Gonzalez called the Orlando, Florida Police Department and said that she hadn't heard from her roommate in days. The roommate, 42-year-old Runilaide Medina Pacheco, remains missing to this day, but investigators believe that she was killed. And in November 2024, Victoria-Gonzalez was arrested in Hartford, Connecticut on suspicion of second-degree murder, grand theft, and tampering with evidence. According to law enforcement, there are numerous inconsistencies between the suspect's narrative of events and the story told by the evidence, including signs of a violent encounter occurring inside the women's home prior to Medina Pacheco's disappearance. Authorities have revealed few other details about the case, and according to the latest available update, we're starting the process to extradite Victoria-Gonzalez back to Florida to face justice. Number 23. Carmie Nelson. A Summerville, South Carolina woman's kind-hearted decision to take in a needy roommate ended up costing her her life. In April 2017, when she was murdered by the same person she had selflessly opened her door to, 52-year-old Jordyn Lum was struck in the back of the head with a hammer and stabbed dozens of times by 50-year-old Carmie Nelson after their dislike for each other reached its breaking point. Police learned about the crime after receiving a 911 call from Carmie's husband, 37-year-old Daniel Nelson, who admitted to helping Carmie dispose of the body. Daniel told the dispatcher that he had noticed a putrid odor in the couple's garage, at which point Carmie told him they needed to get rid of Lum's corpse. Officers paid a visit to the home where they found Lum's remains wrapped in blankets. Both Carmie and Daniel were taken down to the police station for questioning, where Carmie admitted to being an alcoholic and blamed her substance abuse for her actions. But Lum's murder wasn't necessarily shocking. In hindsight, there was a traceable history of problems between the two women, whose relationship had soured shortly after Carmie moved into the home. In the days leading up to Lum's death, both she and Carmie had called the police on each other. And while Daniel Nelson claimed to have minimal involvement in the crime, investigators uncovered evidence indicating that he was in on his wife's plan to kill Lum, and that he was even planning on helping. But by the time he arrived at the residence from the homeless camp where he was staying at the time, Carmie had already killed Lum. Daniel pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and testified against Carmie when she went on trial for murder. In May of 2019, a jury found her guilty and she was sentenced to life in prison. In an unexpected turn of events, Carmie's conviction was overturned in 2023 after the court concluded that gory photos of the victim should have been withheld from the jury. Prosecutors were planning to retry the case when Carmie agreed to plead guilty to murder in exchange for a 30-year straight sentence, which means no parole. She'll be released in the year 2047 at the age of 81. Number 22. Richard Thomas Martinez. In October 2024, police in Riverside, California, received a concerned call about the well-being of 31-year-old Bradley Minder, who hadn't been seen or heard from in several days. While investigating Minder's disappearance, officers were told that his roommate, 48-year-old Richard Thomas Martinez, had recently admitted to killing someone. During a search of the property where the two men lived, cadaver dogs led investigators to some freshly disturbed soil in the backyard. After a little bit of digging, detectives came across Minder's remains. According to law enforcement, Martinez killed Minder during an altercation. Minder's mother told CBS Los Angeles that her son was already living at the home with his uncle when Martinez moved in. She also claimed that Martinez had been arrested for assaulting Minder's uncle just days before the murder. Following the discovery of the victim's corpse, Martinez was booked into the Robert Presley Detention Center on suspicion of first-degree murder and murder with malice. He pleaded not guilty and remains held without bail as he awaits his next court hearing. Number 21. Joshua Moser. 37-year-old David Hittinger was reported missing in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania on a Monday afternoon in May of 2024 after failing to show up at his own birthday party. He had been last heard from 2 days earlier, and law enforcement launched an investigation into his disappearance. Detectives soon learned that Hittinger had recently moved into the Slatington home of 33-year-old Joshua Moser. They obtained a search warrant for the residence, where they found blood evidence in the basement and evidence of a hastily staged attempt to conceal the blood. Investigators also found a box cutter, a saw, bloody clothing, and other evidence of foul play. During questioning, Moser confessed to strangling Hittinger and bludgeoning him in the head with a hammer. He then proceeded to dismember the victim's body and discarded the parts in various places throughout Slatington and nearby Washington Township. including a cemetery where some of Hittinger's remains were found in a garbage bag. Body parts were also found in a quarry and along a nature trail, and the remains were identified as Hittinger based on the fingerprints of a severed hand. Neighbor Cadence Waterhouse told ABC 6 Action News that she overheard Moser yelling, "Get the F out of here, you don't belong here," prior to the discovery of Hittinger's remains. But she didn't hear anyone yelling back at Moser, and while her interactions with Hittinger were limited, she described him as very shy. Moser was booked into custody on a parole violation and was subsequently charged with criminal homicide, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In an unexpected turn of events, he was found unresponsive in his jail cell in January 2025. While being held without bail, staff members and emergency responders performed life-saving measures but were unable to revive Moser. There was no foul play involved in his death. Number 20. Isidro Rivera Aguero Jr. Shortly after 8 a.m. one morning in September 2024, 911 dispatchers in Davie County, North Carolina, received a call from the concerned stepmother of 29-year-old Isidro Rivera Aguero Jr., who said she was worried that her stepson might have killed someone. The woman's husband had just gone into Aguero's basement apartment in the community of Advance and found a large amount of blood, along with a missing portion of carpet that had been cut out. Aguero's roommate, 62-year-old Warren Doug Maxwell, was noticeably absent from the residence. Deputies responded to the scene and called out for Aguero, who surrendered peacefully and immediately admitted that there was a dead body in a van outside. The cops noticed a foot sticking out of the back of the van, where they found Maxwell's murdered body wrapped in a carpet, a mattress, and other items. The victim's remains bore obvious evidence of blunt force trauma, making it clear that he had met with foul play. Aguero was booked into the Davie County Detention Center, where he remains held on a murder charge, with bond set at $2 million. If convicted as charged, he'll face a minimum sentence of life without parole and could potentially face the death penalty. His alleged motive for killing Maxwell has yet to be revealed. Number 19. Mark Newsome. An argument between roommates over a Taco Bell meal took a horrifying turn in late January of 2024, ending with one man dead and another behind bars. 54-year-old Mark Newsome is accused of fatally beating 72-year-old Derrion Mitchell during the disagreement, which took place at their Roseville, Michigan home. According to prosecutors, Newsome punched Mitchell in the head repeatedly, resulting in a bloody scene that terrified their two other roommates. Bob McQuaid and Larry Melton awoke to the commotion, which McQuaid later described as senseless. During an interview with local station WJBK, McQuaid expressed his shock during his conversation with a reporter, stating that it was inconceivable to think that a fight over food would escalate into murder and that the incident scared the hell out of him. He said that he had previously considered Newsome a trusted friend and was shocked that he would have done something like that. Melton reported hearing, "Why are you doing this? Leave me alone and quit. Please quit." During the altercation, the situation was perhaps best summarized by Macomb County prosecutor Peter J. Lucido, who said that there's got to be more to life than killing someone over food, and it would have been a lot easier to walk away. Loved ones described Mitchell as a kind, gentle soul whose health was deteriorating at the time of the attack. Newsome is facing a second-degree murder charge, which is a life felony in the state of Michigan, and the case has been bound over for trial. He remains in custody at the Macomb County Jail with bond set at $500,000 and will be required to wear an ankle monitor if he manages to come up with the funds to secure his release. Number 18. Nichole Rice. 18-year-old Anita Knudsen was pursuing an elementary education degree at Minot State University in North Dakota and working two jobs to support herself. When she vanished on June 2nd, 2007, her family started to worry when she failed to show up at her job, and their concerns only grew when they were unable to reach her over the following days. Anita's father, Gordon, found her car in her apartment parking lot, but no one answered the door. He requested a welfare check and accompanied the building's manager into the unit, where they found Anita's brutally murdered body on a blood-saturated mattress. She had been viciously stabbed to death, yet her body bore no defensive wounds, indicating that she had been attacked by someone she knew and wasn't afraid of. There were no signs of robbery, and investigators suspected that a slashed window screen and a pocket knife left behind on the windowsill may have been part of a deliberate attempt to fake the appearance of a break-in. Law enforcement spent considerable time looking at male persons of interest, including a man Anita had recently rejected, the building's maintenance man, and dozens of construction workers who were stationed at a job site nearby. But one key person went overlooked, at least in the beginning: Anita's roommate, Nichole Rice, whom she did not get along with. The two women had nothing nice to say about each other, and their mothers had even gotten into a verbal spat due to their ongoing issues and their inability to get along. Anita disapproved of Rice's frequent gentleman callers and was afraid of her roommate's short temper, according to her mother Sharon Knutson, who told the Washington Post that Rice had sent Anita threatening messages. Rice was supposedly away visiting family during the weekend of Anita's murder, and while detectives didn't rule her out as a person of interest, they lacked enough evidence to charge her with any crimes. The case went unsolved for 15 years until March of 2022, when Rice was charged with second-degree murder in connection with the cold case. Authorities did not disclose what new evidence they discovered to justify the arrest, but according to news sources, Rice's ex-boyfriend had recently told police that Rice had drunkenly confessed to murdering Anita a year or two after her death. According to a criminal complaint, Rice's family members gave inconsistent statements regarding her whereabouts at the time of the murder. Rice was released on a $120,000 bail shortly after her arrest, and the case is ongoing. An update from November 2024 lists a projected trial date of March 2025, but whether the proceedings will commence as scheduled or face further delays remains to be seen. Number 17. Elvin Noel Baca. In March of 2024, sheriff's deputies in New Hanover County, North Carolina, responded to a 911 call from a concerned woman who couldn't find her friend, 69-year-old Lawrence Grabka. The caller told law enforcement that she had found Grabka's front door unlocked and entered his home, where she found his phone and wallet, but no sign of Grabka himself. The woman was especially concerned because Grabka typically relied on her for rides and therefore almost never left the house without her. While investigating the case, police found Grabka's body buried in a shallow grave in his backyard. He had been stabbed in the face 3 times, twice in the neck and once in the chest. His roommate, 34-year-old Elvin Noel Baca, was arrested on charges of first-degree murder and concealing or failing to report a death. The worried friend who called police for help finding Grabka, Catherine Roosh, told local news outlet WECT that she had encouraged Grabka to kick Baca out. She had a bad feeling about Baca, who she believed had mental health issues which made him dangerous. Shortly before Grabka's murder, he and Baca had gotten into a tense discussion because Baca was 3 months behind on rent. Grabka was reportedly upset but had not kicked Baca out like Roosh wanted him to do. Roosh believes she crossed paths with Baca after he killed Grabka when she went to the home in search of her missing friend. She said that Baca denied seeing Grabka that day and that he smiled and told Roosh he loved her, creating a disturbing image that she couldn't get out of her head. According to court documents, Baca confessed to killing Grabka. As of February 2025, he's in the custody of a state mental hospital while undergoing a court-ordered competency exam to determine whether he's mentally fit to proceed with his case. Number 16. Michael Bellaire. 53-year-old Cheryl Cook was strangled to death on November 2nd, 2023, inside the Warsaw, New York apartment she shared with her roommate, 42-year-old Michael Bellaire. By the time her body was found wrapped in plastic 5 days later, Bellaire had fled town with her car and credit cards. He quickly became the prime suspect in the case, but his whereabouts remained a mystery until nearly a year later, when he was found working at a car wash an hour south of the U.S. border in the Mexican tourist town of Puerto Peñasco. Someone had apparently recognized him as a wanted individual and notified the authorities, and federal agents moved swiftly to take him into custody. Bellaire was extradited to Wyoming County, New York, where he pleaded not guilty to felony charges including murder, strangulation, tampering with evidence, and grand larceny. The accused killer's initial court hearing was attended by Cook's son, Colin Frank, and her sister, Monica Miller. Afterward, Frank told local news outlet WHAM that Bellaire looked rougher after his year on the run, older, skinnier, and with more gray hair. The case is ongoing, and Bellaire remains held without bail at the Wyoming County Jail. According to news reports, he's well known to police in the village of Warsaw for petty crimes like driving on a suspended license, but this appears to be his first time accused of major violence. Number 15. David James Alexandro Rosales. while responding to a call about an altercation shortly after 10:30 a.m. on October 11, 2022. Officers in Asheboro, North Carolina, encountered 2 damaged vehicles and 3 people fighting in the street. According to authorities, 26-year-old David James Alexandro Rosales had deliberately rammed his roommate, Katie Marie Bishop's car into a vehicle occupied by his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. Police arrested Rosales on suspicion of assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, assault with a deadly weapon, assault on a female, communicating threats, and injury to personal property. While in custody, he confessed to killing 44-year-old Bishop and stuffing her body in a closet at their apartment in nearby Randleman. Officers entered the residence through a window and found Bishop's body in the closet where Rosales had said it would be. She had been stabbed and bludgeoned, and Rosales was charged with her murder. Bishop's upstairs neighbor and friend, Glenda Noel, told Fox 8 that she initially didn't think it was a big deal when she overheard Bishop and Rosales arguing that night. It certainly wasn't the first time, but Noel eventually got worried enough to go downstairs to check on Bishop. She said Rosales answered the door and blocked the view inside with his body, and she later saw him putting pillows against the window in an apparent attempt to obscure the view from outside. Meanwhile, the next-door neighbors reportedly overheard Rosales beating Bishop to death. Rosales was booked into the Randolph County Detention Center, where he remains held without bond as he waits to square away his multitude of legal issues. In October 2024, roughly 2 years after his arrest for the car crash and Bishop's murder, he was charged with felony assault causing physical injury to a detention employee for allegedly attacking a jail guard. In the aftermath of Bishop's death, the main question on the minds of those who knew her is why. One of Bishop's friends said that Rosales practically had their shared home all to himself because of the amount of time Bishop spent at her boyfriend's house in another area. Bishop also felt sympathetic toward Rosales and had only tried to make his life easier. According to those who knew her, authorities have yet to reveal a suspected motive for the brutal act of violence, leaving the case shrouded in mystery for the time being. Number 14. Jordyn Jones.
My ex-boyfriend just stole my car. He took my keys and ran.
21-year-old Clark Atlanta University student Alexis Crawford was reported missing on November 1st, 2019, just days after she had filed an assault report against her roommate's boyfriend, 21-year-old Baron Brantley. Her family had last heard from her 2 days prior to making the report. Crawford's roommate, 21-year-old Jordyn Jones, told investigators that she and Crawford were not on speaking terms due to a prior incident, but denied any knowledge of the young woman's whereabouts. She claimed that Crawford simply wasn't at their apartment on Halloween morning and hadn't been back since. But Jones exhibited some suspicious behaviors that detectives couldn't ignore. Prior to Crawford's disappearance, Jones had contacted her family and said that the test results from samples that were taken after the assault had tested negative for her boyfriend's DNA, even though the samples ended up testing positive. After Crawford went missing, investigators sprayed the apartment with luminol and found bloodstains in at least 6 places throughout the living room. They also watched surveillance footage which showed Jones and Brantley pulling Crawford's car up to the building, leading to the suspicion that the couple had loaded Crawford's body into the vehicle prior to taking it somewhere and disposing of it. When confronted with the evidence, Jones admitted that Crawford had been murdered in their apartment during the early morning hours on the day of her disappearance. Crawford had discovered that Jones had snuck Brantley into the apartment, despite the alleged assault that had taken place, leading to a physical fight between the two women. During the altercation, Brantley manually strangled Crawford and put a plastic bag over her head. He and Jones then cleaned up the scene and dumped Crawford's body in a wooded area before attending a Halloween party later that day. A week after Crawford vanished, Jones led police to her remains and she and Brantley were charged with murder. More than 5 years later, the case is ongoing, with the most recent updates revolving around the prosecution's fight to admit jailhouse phone calls into evidence while the defense tries to block the move. Number 13. Richard Bennaugh. A fight over a TV remote erupted into homicidal violence for 2 Maryland men in January 2024 when 38-year-old Richard Bennaugh was accused of fatally shooting his roommate, 26-year-old Dominique Scott Hayes, at their Springdale home. According to court documents, Bennaugh called 911 at around noon and confessed to shooting Hayes during an altercation more than 6.5 hours earlier. He told police that the incident began at around 5:30 a.m. when he awoke on the sofa to Hayes being noisy in the kitchen. A few minutes later, Hayes asked where the TV remote was. Bennaugh ignored him and covered his head with a blanket, but Hayes kept asking, prompting him to remove the blanket. He claimed that Hayes was standing over him with 2 knives, prompting him to grab his gun and point it at his roommate. According to Bennaugh, Hayes said, "You won't shoot me," and came at him, at which point Bennaugh fired several rounds. Hayes ran upstairs, according to Bennaugh, who said that he went back to sleep after noticing no signs of blood in the immediate area and assuming the bullets had missed Hayes. After waking up, he drove to a marijuana dispensary, came back home, smoked some cannabis, flushed the shell casings down the toilet, and told some friends about what had happened. At the urging of his friends, Bennaugh finally called 911. Officers found Hayes face down in his room with 1 knife in each hand and a 3rd in his waistband. Bennaugh was arrested at the scene and is currently in custody at the Prince George's County Correctional Center on suspicion of manslaughter. Number 12. Jordyn Jones. 23-year-old California State University student Scott Gregory Hawkins was beaten to death with a baseball bat on October 21, 2009 at the hands of his roommate, 20-year-old Jordyn Mohammed Jones. Officers responded to the young men's college dorm, which they shared with 2 other roommates, after receiving a report about violent behavior. They could see Jones smashing things with a bat when they looked in through the window, and when the police opened the front door, they found Jones holding a knife with his tongue hanging out of his mouth and a crazed look in his eyes. Jones charged at the officers, who shot the young man several times in self-defense. According to law enforcement, he continued advancing toward the officers even after being hit in the chest by multiple bullets. The cops managed to subdue Jones, who was rushed to the hospital and ultimately survived his injuries. Hawkins, on the other hand, had succumbed to his injuries. Jones was charged with murder and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He had not slept the night before the killing and, according to court-appointed experts, had been suffering from a schizophrenic or schizoaffective episode when he killed Hawkins. In April 2012, roughly 2.5 years after Hawkins' death, Jones pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years to life. The judge also found him insane and committed him to a mental institution, which meant that he would be entitled to annual hearings to determine if he's still legally insane. Normally, if an inmate in this situation recovers, they become eligible for release. But the judge implemented a measure to prevent that from happening. In addition to the murder charge, Jones pleaded guilty to 3 counts each of attempted murder and brandishing a weapon. He was sentenced to 18 years for the latter charges, with the term to run concurrent to his murder sentence. In other words, if his mental health improves, he'll be sent to prison for the remainder of his 18-year term. The agreement was negotiated with the approval of Hawkins' parents, who stopped short of saying that they believed justice had been served, but described the deal as reasonable and fair. Number 11. Scott Pettigrew. 65-year-old Mimi Anita Cowan was found dead and floating face down in her swimming pool outside her Cathedral City, California home in June of 2016. She had been beaten to death by her tenant, Scott Pettigrew, just hours after police had stopped at the residence to handle a dispute between the 2 parties. Cowan had recently filed for a restraining order against 50-year-old Pettigrew, a co-worker who she had rented a room out to after he was evicted from another living arrangement due to an altercation with a neighbor. She accused Pettigrew of being a complete slob who refused to pay rent and made her feel unsafe due to his increasingly threatening behavior. Pettigrew let his dogs urinate and defecate all over the house, refused to throw garbage away, didn't clean up his vomit after getting sick in the bathroom, stole Cowan's silver cutlery, and even poured water on her computers. In her application for a restraining order, Cowan wrote that Pettigrew was purposely keeping her in constant fear of him and what he would do next time. She described being terrorized daily in her own home and routinely subjected to Pettigrew's explosive tirades, which seemed to only worsen with time. The judge ordered Pettigrew to move his dogs out of the home and stay at least 5 yards from Cowan at all times, but concluded that he did not pose a physical threat to Cowan and therefore did not require him to move out. Pettigrew killed Cowan 4 days later after being served with the restraining order. While searching Cowan's home after her murder, police found a tape recorder containing an audio recording of her final moments alive. In it, Cowan could be heard screaming, telling Pettigrew to stay away from her and mentioning how he was beating up an old lady amid sounds of a physical scuffle occurring. In 2019, a jury found Pettigrew guilty of first-degree murder, elder abuse, and violating a protective order. He was sentenced to 25 years to life and his appeals have all been rejected. Number 10. Alyssa Jane Venable. While conducting a welfare check at a home in Fredericksburg, Virginia, In June of 2024, police found 77-year-old Robert J. Maguire, 60-year-old Gregory S. Powell, and 65-year-old Carol Ann Reese dead from gunshot wounds. A fourth roommate, 23-year-old Alyssa Jane Venable, was nowhere to be found. Police soon learned that Venable had made some alarming comments to friends and had been acting strange. She told one friend that she had hurt people and had placed a package in the friend's mother's mailbox containing money, all of her account passwords, and instructions on how to care for her dog. Venable quickly rose to the top of the suspect list, sparking a large-scale interstate manhunt. While executing a search warrant at her home, police found evidence of a large amount of money having been taken, indicating the possibility of robbery as a motive. A friend told Spotsylvania County deputies that Venable might be heading west to California, but her phone pings took law enforcement in an unexpected direction 2 days into the manhunt, when Venable's 2009 Honda Civic was located near the town of Angelica in upstate New York. Venable led police on a high-speed chase along Interstate 86 for 40 miles, reaching speeds of over 100 miles per hour before the vehicle was disabled in the town of Avoca using spike strips. Venable lost control of the car and crashed into a guardrail along an overpass, where she was immediately surrounded by law enforcement and taken into custody. She was treated for pain at a nearby hospital before being taken to jail on suspicion of 3 counts of second-degree murder and using a firearm to commit a felony. Following Venable's arrest, authorities began the extradition process to bring her back to Virginia. Updates have not been forthcoming, however, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Number 9. Julia Birch. In July of 2021, 26-year-old Julia Birch called 911 and confessed to killing her 92-year-old roommate, Nancy Ann Frankel. Emergency responders arrived at the home in Montgomery County, Maryland, to find Frankel dead in a manner which appeared consistent with Birch's story. Birch had tried to asphyxiate Frankel with a plastic bag and resorted to manual strangulation when Frankel poked a hole in the bag. She was charged with the senior citizen's murder, and the subsequent mental evaluation found that Birch was suffering from schizoaffective symptoms at the time of the crime, but still knew the difference between right and wrong. The assessment also found that Birch had the ability to control her behavior when she killed Frankel, which essentially ruled out the possibility of an insanity defense. Birch pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in March of 2023 and was sentenced to 23 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to perform 240 hours of community service following her release. Additionally, the judge recommended Birch for placement in the Eligible Person Program, which, according to the state government's website, addresses the needs of offenders with severe character disorders who typically have a history of substance dependency. Number 8. Luisa Ines Cutting. During the early morning hours one day in January of 2019, police responded to an off-campus near Radford University in Montgomery County, Virginia. They were greeted by a young woman covered in blood, who immediately confessed to killing her best friend and readily gave herself up for arrest. Later identified as 21-year-old Luisa Ines Cutting, she was taken into custody while officers went inside the apartment, where they found 20-year-old Alexa Cannon lying dead on the floor with a butcher knife sticking out of her mouth. Cannon had been stabbed 30 to 40 times in what looked like a crime of severe rage, yet Cutting claimed to have a foggy memory of the stabbing and was unable to tell law enforcement why she did it. And while she acted remorseful on some level, she also seemed out of touch with reality. She admitted that she and Cannon had used a large amount of drugs and alcohol the previous night, including psychedelic mushrooms, cocaine, Xanax, and marijuana, which could perhaps help to explain her bizarre behavior during her interactions with the police. In addition to saying that she did cocaine with the devil, Cutting prayed, mentioned the apocalypse, and repeatedly recited Hail Mary in Spanish in the interrogation room. She ended up spending a week in a mental facility for what prosecutors later described as a psychotic break, but her mental issues afforded her no leniency in court. 8 months after the killing, Cutting pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Under the terms of her plea agreement, the remaining half of her sentence could be suspended in favor of probation after the 20-year mark. But she's prohibited from appealing her sentence as part of the deal, which was negotiated with input from Cannon's family and ensures that she'll spend at least 2 decades behind bars. Number 7. Richard Isaac. Within weeks of welcoming 44-year-old Richard Isaac into her Toronto home as a roommate, in June of 2018, 28-year-old Victoria Selby Reedman wanted him to move out as soon as possible. She had allowed Isaac to move in because she needed help affording the rent, but she was put off by his heavy drinking habits and alarming behavior. Unbeknownst to Selby Reedman, Isaac had a history of misogynistic offenses, including 8 prior convictions involving 3 past intimate partners. He also had an established pattern of disregarding court orders to leave women alone, and there was a warrant out for his arrest for a domestic incident when he beat and stomped Selby Reedman to death just 3 weeks after moving into her apartment. After murdering the young woman while already in an intoxicated state, Isaac went and bought more alcohol. He stayed at the apartment for 2 more days while periodically leaving to buy more booze, then left the residence, taking all his belongings with him and leaving scarcely a sign that he had been there in the first place. Following his arrest, Isaac denied any wrongdoing. During his trial for Selby Reedman's murder in 2020, the defense argued that Isaac returned home from a booze run to find Selby Reedman dead. Isaac's lawyer suggested that the woman had been killed by a jilted ex-lover during the defendant's brief absence from the apartment. Furthermore, the defense denied that Isaac fled the department due to Selby Reedman's murder, but because he was wanted on domestic violence charges. Isaac also offered an account of the events leading up to Selby Reedman's death that the prosecutor claimed was bogus, claiming that Selby Reedman had asked him to stop drinking in the apartment, but that they were still on good enough terms to make plans to eat dinner together on the day of Selby Reedman's death. After deliberating for 2 days, the jury found Isaac guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 18 years and has never expressed remorse for his actions. Number 6. Lisa Gonzales. 61-year-old Margaret Mamer was murdered and dismembered sometime between May 13th and June 2nd of 2018. During a welfare check, police found her remains stuffed into a Rubbermaid bin in a storage room at the residence where she had been rented a room from 47-year-old Lisa Gonzales. While the medical examiner who performed Mamer's autopsy was unable to determine a cause of death, it was clear based on the state of her remains that she had suffered blunt force trauma and sharp force injuries. Mamer had been renting from Gonzales for 9 or 10 months at a bargain rate of just $400 per month, according to court documents. Gonzales had agreed to rent to the astronomically low price because she felt sorry for Mamer, who had nowhere else to go after falling on hard times and losing her home. But the living arrangement quickly became unbearable for Gonzales, who became frustrated over things being misplaced and disappearing entirely around the house. She asked Mamer to leave, but Mamer didn't go willingly. In April of 2018, Gonzales gave Mamer a 30-day notice to leave, but once again, Mamer stayed put. Another roommate later told police that on the suspected day of Mamer's death, Gonzales had told her to stay out of the bathroom. She noticed a metallic odor followed by the smell of vinegar late that evening. The following day, the roommate overheard what sounded like a power saw being used in the bathroom. Later that day, the apartment began to smell like rotten eggs. When the roommate asked Gonzales where Mamer was, Gonzales reportedly said that Mamer had left, but not the way she should have. Police paid a visit to the home after receiving a tip from the boyfriend of Gonzales' daughter, who said that his girlfriend had told him that her mother killed someone and was trying to dispose of the body. Officers noticed that Mamer's room had been cleaned out, but they didn't end up having to look far to find the missing woman. While searching the basement of the home, they found bins containing bags full of heavily decomposed and partially liquefied human remains. When confronted with the evidence, Gonzales claimed that she couldn't recall exactly what had happened, but that she might have flipped during an argument. She was arrested for murder and pleaded not guilty, but news on the case went silent. Number 5. Christian Millet. A 23-year-old New York City man is facing a second-degree murder charge in the killing of his roommate, 65-year-old Edwin Echevarria, whose dismembered torso was found floating in a suitcase along the East River on February 5th, 2025. The luggage was spotted by a ferry captain who called the NYPD's harbor unit for help when he was unable to pull it out of the water himself. According to prosecutors, Echevarria was a grandfather figure to the accused killer, Christian Millet, who reportedly confessed to beating the older man to death while he pleaded for his life. During a police interview, Millet said he knocked Echevarria to the ground, stomped on the victim's head, and dismembered his body with a tool. He also described feeling an insane urge to kill and said that it would be easier to kill in the future now that he's done it once. Millet and Echevarria were living together on Manhattan's Lower East Side when Echevarria went missing several days before his torso was found. Shocked, community members described Echevarria as a kind neighbor and a likable family man who enjoyed talking about his children, and some neighbors said they were unaware that he had anyone living with him. Echevarria retired from his career with the U.S. Postal Service in 2024 and didn't get to enjoy his retirement for very long before his life was taken from him. Millet has no prior arrests in New York City, according to authorities, and is currently being held without bail at Rikers Island as he awaits his next court hearing. Number 4. Derrion Mitchell. 45-year-old Adrienne Russell was murdered in the backyard of her Houston, Texas home on New Year's Eve in 2021. Police responded to the scene shortly before 9:30 p.m. and found Russell dead and covered in stab wounds. Her roommate, 19-year-old Derrion Mitchell, told officers that he had stepped away from the residence and that he returned to find Russell lying on the ground and gurgling blood. He claimed he performed CPR, but it was too late to save Russell. Mitchell fell under suspicion after police talked to another roommate who had placed a 911 call that evening. The roommate said that Russell, who was an animal lover, had gotten upset with Mitchell for keeping his new puppy locked in his room, where the dog could be heard whining for attention. On the night of Russell's murder, the roommate, who ended up calling 911, said he had gone for a half-hour bike ride, during which time he believed Mitchell killed Russell. He later changed his story and admitted to being home at the time of the murder, telling investigators that he was initially scared to tell the truth because Mitchell had threatened him. The man claimed that he told Mitchell that he didn't want to kill anyone and that Mitchell replied, "I do this every day." Mitchell was arrested on suspicion of murder and remains held at the Harris County Jail with bond set at $800,000. Number 3. Christina Adams. While responding to a residence at around 8 a.m. one morning in September 2022, sheriff's deputies in Marion County, Florida found 2 stabbing victims, only one of whom was conscious and able to speak. He said that their attacker had left the house and gave what information he could before he and the other victim were rushed to the hospital. One of the victims suffered major blood loss from a puncture wound to the heart, while the other was required to undergo emergency surgery. Law enforcement quickly caught up with the suspect, 30-year-old Christina Adams, who was spotted driving nearby with a female passenger in her car. The passenger told deputies that she was unaware of the stabbing and that Adams hadn't mentioned it to her. Adams initially denied involvement in the crime, but eventually admitted to shocking the victims with a taser pen and stabbing them with a 9-inch kitchen knife as part of a plot to kill them after they had asked her to move out. On the day of the incident, the roommates told Adams that she had until the end of the day to be gone, at which point she put her sinister plan into action. Believing the victims were dead, Adams tried to destroy evidence, then changed her outfit and left the scene. She was on her way back to the house from a nearby Publix supermarket when detectives tracked her down. When they asked Adams what she planned to do when she got back, she said that she had some laundry to throw in the dryer, but was unsure of what she would do with the victims' bodies. Initial reports identified the victims as Adams' roommates, but court documents and later reports revealed that the individuals who were stabbed are Adams' parents, Richard and Sally Langer. Richard died from his injuries, and Adams was charged with first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder with a deadly weapon, and evidence tampering. The case is ongoing, and Adams remains in custody without bail at the Marion County Jail. Today's topic was requested by S. Goody Gang, Nebra Lesto 1368, and Lady Undead 32. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Sinedu Tadesse. Harvard University was struck by an unspeakable tragedy in May of 1995 when a 20-year-old pre-med student from Ethiopia named Sinedu Tadesse stabbed her Vietnamese roommate Trang Ho 45 times in their shared dorm. A guest who stayed overnight awoke to see Tadesse plunging a hunting knife into Trang Ho and tried to intervene but was also stabbed. By the time help arrived, both Tadesse and Trang were dead. A look into Tadesse's activities leading up to the stabbing suggests that she felt isolated and was struggling with potentially severe mental health issues. She struggled to make friends and worried that her grades weren't good enough to get her into a good medical school. Tadesse became so desperately lonely that at one point she mailed a letter to a complete stranger begging them to be her friend. She tried adapting to social norms and being fashionable, but she remained socially awkward. Tadesse thought she had finally found a friend in Trang Ho and was devastated when she learned that Trang had decided not to dorm with her. The following year, she begged Trang to reconsider, but Trang's mind was made up, and Tadesse thus decided to solve what was likely a temporary struggle with a permanent solution. Number 1. Kwang Chol Joy. After finishing her second combat tour in Iraq, 36-year-old U.S. Army veteran Maribel Ramos returned to her hometown in 2012 and settled down in Fullerton, California, where she began her next life chapter of pursuing a college degree. To make life easier on herself financially, she rented a room in her house out to 55-year-old Kwang Chol Joy, who described himself as a professional who was between jobs. 18 months later, in May of 2023, Ramos vanished, seemingly into thin air. Her family reported her missing, and investigators quickly learned that Joy had a romantic obsession with her. In fact, Joy has supposedly gone out of his way in his attempts to win Ramos over, and he continued trying even after she made it clear that she only saw him as a friend. Unwilling to let go of his ambitions to pursue a relationship with Ramos, Joy continued doing things to try pleasing her and in hopes of making himself seem more attractive to her. He bought her a cruise ticket and even got plastic surgery in an attempt to look younger, but Ramos remained uninterested, and at the same time she was becoming frustrated with Joy because he had fallen behind on his rent and didn't seem to be making much of an effort to catch up. She had even called the police to their home during an argument roughly 2 weeks before her disappearance because she felt unsafe. 2 weeks after Ramos went missing, her heavily decomposed body was found in a shallow grave at a remote site in the Santa Ana Mountains. Due to the condition of her remains, it was impossible to determine the cause of death, but the medical examiner labeled the case a homicide based on the circumstances. The more investigators learned, the more they suspected Joy of killing Ramos. On the day Ramos was likely killed, she had told Joy that he needed to move out due to his failure to pay rent. After her murder, Joy had researched human decomposition on a public library computer as well as the coordinates of the site where Ramos's body was eventually found. Prosecutors charged Joy with second-degree murder and accused him of killing Ramos in a panic after she told him to leave, arguing that he couldn't bear the thought of no longer living with the object of his obsession. Joy maintained his innocence even after being found guilty of second-degree murder in 2014 and continues to deny any wrongdoing from behind bars at the correctional training facility in Soledad, California, where he's serving 15 years to life. He's never shown remorse for his actions and refuses to do so, saying that he won't apologize for something he didn't do. Thanks for watching. Would you rather share a cell with R. Kelly or with Diddy, and why? Let us know in the comments section below.